One of my Patreon supporters asked me about Sam Altman's blog post where he talked about we're having a gentle singularity, and they said, what's your interpretation of this? Now, if you haven't seen the blog post that he wrote, it came out a little while ago, and he talks about things about how AI is smarter than us in a lot of ways, but yet the singularity so far hasn't been quite as dramatic or strange or weird as, quote, many anticipated. And so the interpretation that I gave is pretty simple, which is basically that when you look at it from the perspective of a techno-optimist who's in Silicon Valley and not necessarily in the real world, yes, everything looks basically the same and things aren't changing as quickly as you might hope. And this is called Hofstadter's law. So Hofstadter's law says basically whatever you're doing, it'll take longer than you think that it will, even when you take into account Hofstadter's law. So it's a recursive, self-referential kind of mental heuristic. Now, in technology, this is almost always the case. You look at predictions that people like Elon Musk have made, where he's like, we'll have full self-driving, by 2017. Here we are 8 years later. It's mostly working now, and every time they roll out a new FSD package, it gets better. We have Waymos that are fully autonomous and that sort of thing. So it's here now, but it took longer than you imagined or that he imagined that it would. And this is, people like to dunk on Elon because, Elon time is usually incorrect. And he has even started acknowledging that. He's like, he took impossible to late, right? It's better to be late than to be wrong. So anyways, that's just one example of Hofstadter's law, and it's particularly egregious in tech. So this is not to necessarily apologize for Sam Altman or Elon Musk. Like, the billionaires can look out for themselves. But what I'm saying is that ordinary people in technology also make these mistakes all the time. When you're deploying a new server rack or building out a new web app or whatever. In my 15-year tech career, we ran into this problem all the time where, you imagine in an ideal scenario, if everything goes correctly and, all the resources are available on time and you don't get distracted by anything, Project X should take 3 weeks. But then a rule of thumb that I learned from my bosses at the time and people that were more experienced is whatever you think is the ideal scenario, just double it. And that was almost always more accurate. Just because things come up, resources aren't going to be in place, someone might not be available, an emergency is going to distract you, those sorts of things. And that's not, because you might say, oh, well, it was more complex than you thought. In some cases, yes. There was a meme circulating a couple years ago that said, like, we did this not because we thought it would be easy, we did this not because we thought it was hard, but because we thought it would be easy. Sometimes technical complexity is the barrier, but often it's like simple stuff. Implementation takes longer, getting sign-offs takes longer, getting the budget approved takes longer. Often, particularly really high intelligence tech people, we're often correct or mostly correct on how technically complex something is going to be. When we are familiar with that domain. I'm not going to say if it's a completely new domain, our intuition is right. I'm not trying to blow up our egos like that. But if it's something that you've done before, building servers or building a web app or training an AI model, you generally know what goes into doing that thing. So then how does this translate back to Sam Altman's perspective, right? The perspective that Sam Altman has that makes him unironically say, the singularity is gentle. Really so this is kind of the core of my interpretation. Really what he's saying is that it's gentler than he expected. So he expected that, and you look back at Silicon Valley and OpenAI and everyone's starry-eyed predictions, including some of my own, over the last few years, where we kind of anticipate accelerating returns and compounding returns, and then suddenly nothing is going to be the same anymore, and everything's going to break all at once. Even with past revolutions, technology revolutions, nothing ever happened that fast. And that has led to the meme, nothing ever happens. At the same time, it does take a while to get to a point of diffusion and saturation. So these are kind of two vague, hand-wavy terms. They actually do have very specific meanings, depending on the context, whether you're talking about economics or technological or whatever. So diffusion is basically the rate at which new ideas or technologies proliferate out into the world, and saturation is what percentage of people are actually using it at the correct level. So for instance, television, internet, cars, those are at a level of technological saturation where there's kind of diminishing returns, right? Some new people are going to be purchasing cars every now and then. Some new people are going to be purchasing televisions and smartphones every now and then, but particularly in the developed world, we've reached a point of saturation. The technology has fully diffused, and yes, there is some asymmetry in terms of access and that sort of thing. But with artificial intelligence, we're very early on in the curves of saturation and diffusion. And so saturation point right now, last I checked in the Fortune 500, only about 20% of Fortune 500 companies even have a single official use for generative AI. So we're still very, very early in the grand scheme of things. The vast majority of these companies are not using generative AI for anything, at least on an official level. Now, obviously, mid-level managers and developers and all kinds of people are probably using generative AI for their own accounts. But from a company, from a corporate policy perspective, they don't even care about generative AI yet. It's not on their radar. So that tells you that the diffusion level is still, or the saturation level is pretty low, even if it's starting to diffuse out. Now, another reason that, some of the Silicon Valley tech bros are disappointed is because they're like, it's capable now. The problem is solved now. Why aren't you using it? Why is it not changing everything? And this is the gap between messy reality and an idealized reality. So an idealized reality is, this can solve the problem. Why don't you just implement it? But when you have, spaghetti code, when you have legacy code, and you have mid-level managers making decisions about where to invest, time, attention, energy, like the human factor is always the slowest thing. And even for fully proven technologies, some companies still struggle with implementing them. This was due to my personality and my expertise during my technology career. I was frequently working for companies going through overhauls and transitions. So basically, they wanted to bring people in that were, young and energetic and wanted to do things right and modernize everything. So I was often hired by companies that were going through that journey. And even when you have executive level buy-in for those kinds of transformational journeys, it still takes a minimum of 18 months, usually much longer. My very last company that I worked for was a big auto parts retailer. I'm not going to say which one, but it was a big auto parts retailer that was going through a modernization because it was over 100 years old. They had legacy code. I mean, they were still running SCO Unix. And if you know what that is, you're probably cringing. So, when you're running warehouses that thousands of stores rely on with an operating system that you literally can't install on anything new, that keeps you up at night. And so that kind of inertia is one of the things that we're going to have to be fighting against in order to actually get AI deployed, because people are like, well, this is what we've been using for the last 5, 10, in some cases 30 years. Don't change it, because if you poke it, it'll break and explode, and then we're gonna have to send everyone home for the day. And that actually happens in many companies with legacy tech. Is a critical system breaks, and you can't serve patients, you can't serve clients, you can't serve customers. So rather than paying people to sit around looking at each other, you have to make an executive decision. Do we send hundreds of people home today or not? Those are the kinds of decisions that executives are actually making. And so that all speaks to, why is it taking longer for the Singularity to ramp up than it could or should? And that's not even looking at the cost bottlenecks, right? You're looking at chips and energy and those sorts of things. Even if OpenAI and Google and Microsoft and Meta wanted to serve 100% of businesses and 100% of individuals globally, they couldn't yet. They literally just don't have the infrastructure. So that is my interpretation of Sam Altman saying, this is the gentle singularity. It's gentle compared to what he had expected from his very narrow tech bro startup kind of mentality, which is, we're going to change everything all at once, because from his inside perspective, things do change all at once very quickly when you're in venture capital and Y Combinator and the startup space. So thanks for listening to my ramble. I hope you liked it. Cheers. Bye.